Going off meta in TFT is a big risk that doesn't always pay off. This is even more true in a reroll meta when everyone's typing in chat what they're committed to and you're stuck in a spot where you don't know what to play. Well, in this episode of In Too Deep, we cover an off-meta player's SpicyAppies in the Freljord Cup competing against all of the standard meta comps and shows you what to do when things aren't going exactly your way. Appy chases an underplayed reroll composition, bashing Kassadin, and goes against the grain, both with his comp and his legend choices. All right, let's jump into the game. Looks like the vote was overwhelmingly in favor of Thresh of Sanctum. Some players prefer something like the University if they were going to start for a legend that is beneficial with Prismatic, but not necessarily for Ezreal. He votes for Thresh of Sanctum, which is just good. Get a bunch of resources as the game progresses for each death, and actually works really well with people that want to level a lot. I wouldn't recommend voting for something like Thresh of Sanctum if you are going to be playing more of a low-level reroll strategy, because you'll only have 3 units when people have 4. You'll play 4 units when people have 5, so you're just going to be behind on the soul collection count. Also, another thing that I want to note, speaking of legend, is that Appies is playing Ezreal. You can see him browse 7 Ornn players, 1 Ezreal player, and that's going to be SpicyAppies. Already going off the book, many people are choosing to play Ornn and Poro in this tournament, mainly because of the Ornn artifacts. Ezreal gives you a lot of opportunities to space out what kind of items that you want. If you pick buried treasures, you can slam for tempo or potentially greed for a really strong combination. Keep your options open. Right away, we see Appies gets opened with an early Akshan, so clearly wants to play around Akshan the best that he can. And Akshan's really good because he not only is powerful to build into late game, but early game, he's usually good for sniping units. If you remember Caitlyn from previous sets, she used her ace in the hole to get that snipe. It's very similar to what Akshan does. Okay, so right away, we pause here and take a look at what Appy's augments are. Buried Treasures 2, which is exactly what he's looking for in a situation like this. Buried Treasures 1 and 2 are augments that he'll probably likely play around. He has the opportunity of taking something like Caretaker's Favor, which is a surprisingly decent augment. It's actually the only good augment that people tend to play around if they take Bard, because it gives you that item choice as you level. And as the game develops, having spaced out component anvils actually is kind of good, because based on what drops from the PvE, you can level to say 6 in stage 3 and then choose your item. And then you go to level 7 after stage 4-1, you can choose an item off of that. Riftwalk is really interesting as well because he does have the 2 bash in opening, but he doesn't really have a lot of items that lend itself to it. Kassadin is similar to just an assassin build that wants things like the Jewel Gauntlet and the Hand of Justice, and pretty much that's it. You want to have a lot of glove items to get max crit, assassinate the backline. So it's not actually a really common thing to pick here. Not to mention that a lot of people don't even think Riftwalk is very good. There's a lot of players that believe that out of all the top hero augments, that Warwick is mainly the one that you would play, not really Kassadin. So it's not something that I think many people would go for in his spot. He rerolls, finds Vampiric Blade, which is really good for Zed. Definitely an option to think about. He's scouting around. He sees someone has the Warwick Ravenous Hunter augment, which means that 2-cost rerolls on the table. And he chooses Riftwalk. So it's a really exciting game. People declaring their builds. So MZ Shady already saying Zed. Very good that he didn't choose Vampiric Blades then, because he would be contested Zed. And so he knows that there's at least 2 people who are going to reroll 2 costs. Someone even called multicasters. That's a possibility of them taking out things like Teemo and Talia out of the pool. And so this brings us to our first concept, which is if you are rerolling, the more people rerolling the same tier as you, the better. This means that if other people are rerolling 3 costs, that you should try to pick a 3-cost unit to reroll. If people are going for 2 costs, you do the same thing. This is because they take out the 2s and 3 costs that you don't want to see, and that'll help you hit even faster. In fact, this is something that TFT long-term may need to think about how to solve, because that does tend to make reroll even stronger the more reroll people play it. But hey, that's just part of the nature of the game with a draft pool, the way TFT works. He ends up hitting this 2-star Jhin and replaces the Akshan with it, keeping his Cassiopeia 2 on the field. And this is really important because he's playing around the item that he slammed, which is Sunfire Cape. A lot of people think, oh, if I have Sunfire Cape, then that makes Cassiopeia worse because she's supposed to wound somebody, get that anti-heal. But you forget that she actually has a second part of her ability, which is the bonus damage if they already are wounded. And so combining Cassiopeia with that Sunfire Cape is better than just playing around 2 Deadeye simply because you have Jhin 2 and Akshan 2. However, he should hold on to something like Akshan. It doesn't mean that he sells all this for economy, because he does want, well, 1, he actually can't even make econ, I just counted 9, but 2, that way he has another unit that he can play next and keep up his tempo as he's starting to build his way towards Kassadin. And you can notice that he's not just trying to fit in and play only around Kassadin synergies. He's trying to play his best board to get that early game win streak. And this is another benefit of playing in a reroll meta. Remember that if a lot of people are rerolling, they're generally going to be weak on stage 2 because they're going to try to maximize their economy and hold cheap units while you're trying to get some free wins, and you get the benefit of being able to have high HP and a lot of economy if you're getting that full win streak. So this is actually really clever of a way for SpicyAppies to capitalize on what the meta is likely to be. Many people are going to be losing early game. Try to see if you can get that win streak. That being said, he runs into the Ravaged Hunter Warwick, which everyone knows can be really strong, especially if you build around a strong Ionia core early and get that challengers in. And so he takes that loss. Kind of unfortunate, but I really like the idea. The best component he can go for is Glove, but it just got taken. So now he has to improvise a little bit. If he wants to go for Hand of Justice, the other combination is Jewel Gauntlet, but there are no components that build into this. Usually the best build that you can have for Kassadin is Jewel Gauntlet, Hand of Justice, and a Quicksilver. But if you don't have a Quicksilver, or you even have something that replicates it, like Indomitable Will, the augment that gives you the CC immunity, then you end up going for something like a third Hand of Justice. So that way your critical strike is 100%. That helps you assassinate the backline even quicker. Make sure that you don't leave units alive. One thing that Appies is going to have to figure out later on is, how does he get that supplementary damage? Because sometimes as boards get stronger in the late game, Kassadin will leave units alive by just a little bit of HP. You need to make sure to find that secondary source of damage to make sure to clean up, or have Kassadin be so strong that he'll assassinate. And then the third option would be to build a very tanky board around Bastion, not necessarily Void, because the Bastion is the strong part of Kassadin. A way to evaluate how to maximize the power of a hero augment is to think about what traits actually matter. If you look at the situation, Void doesn't really benefit Kassadin long term because it's all about the summon that you actually have. It's about the Void Remora, the Baron Nashor, the Rift Herald. It's not about Kassadin. So it's really about the Bastion that you have to get all those resistances. The more Bastions you can stack with Kassadin, the tankier he gets, and the more likely that he'll be able to get more casts of Riftwalk. The other thing to realize is that Riftwalk actually stacks AP indefinitely. That's right, infinite scaling with Riftwalk. So the more Kassadin stays alive, the more casts you'll get, meaning that you have inevitability over your opponents. Okay, so overall, the stage 2 went okay. It wasn't super high roll, it wasn't super low roll because he didn't get a full streak either way and kind of bookended it with wins. I like that he's sacrificing his units. We've mentioned this before in other videos, but when you're playing on Thresh of Sanctum, try to have these units die in the corner so that way you can maximize the amount of deaths that you get for Thresh. Even in PV rounds, this counts towards it. Gets a glove that's really, really big, so that way you can make Hand of Justice. And I think that Hand of Justice is even more important. Gets a second glove. So this is already pretty lucky in the sense that he's getting components that he really wants. Although the rest of the components are a little bit awkward. He can definitely make Hand of Justice 1. And I'm sure if he's willing to, he can even go for I was going to say Infinity Edge because that's a way to supplement the crit. This brings us to a big tip. Don't just greed best in slot items when you know that you're playing a weaker composition. The ceiling of your composition is much lower. You have to preserve more HP. So slam those items and don't just always greed for best in slot because by the time you get those perfect items, you're probably already dead. Okay, interesting. Appies goes for a Bloodthirster here instead of something, say, like a Quicksilver or Infinity Edge. So he's going for double healing. This is him saying that he wants to play for tempo as best as he can. He wants to make sure that he commits his items onto the board. This is really good recognition because Appy has identified that Riftwalker is not the strongest rerolls. It's not going to beat out a lot of comps consistently, like, the Zeds and the KLs and other things that hit their peak power. And so he needs to capitalize on the window that he has right now and preserve as much of that health. And yes, he doesn't have best in slot items, but he wants to get those wins where he can. It's a little bit unfortunate because he's going up against Kiyun, who leveled to 6, rolled it down really aggressively, but I don't hate the slam here, even though he took that loss. Looking at his options, Tiny Grab Bag, Transfusion, and Healing Orbs. Healing Orbs is actually kind of interesting because that means if Kassadin assassinates the backline, he will heal another unit that helps stay alive and gives him more time. So Healing Orbs in general is pretty good, especially for comps that want to stall out. Tiny Grab Bag is generically fine because it just gives you, a random component. You have the Reforger. He has a ready magnetic remover, so it's lower value, but extra gold isn't that bad. Transfusion is also really interesting because it synergizes with the resistances. Generally, the defensive formula is health plus resistances. if you're able to get a lot of HP, then you want those resistances. So let's say you're playing bruisers, you want things like the Bramble Vest, the Dragon's Claw, the Protector's Vow. The inverse is also true. Bastion gives a lot of resistances in the trait, so therefore HP is also valuable. Hence why I think Healing Orbs or Transfusion makes the most sense. Interesting. So he actually hit Indomitable Will, but goes with Transfusion. Looks like he really values that HP with that resistance because it works with that trait. I do think Indomitable Will was also worth considering. Okay, so Appies is rolling down, but he's not finding any Kassadins. Has a Maokai. He makes the Akshan 2 instead. And you know what? This is really good recognition of just playing your strongest board because this is consistent with the strategy that he's trying to implement. Instead of just saying, hey, I'm playing Bastions, I need to roll down until I hit Kassadin 2. He's recognized that this is another way that he can play for strongest board. So I really like this play, and this brings us to our second concept, which is don't just roll for your specific units according to the guide, play around what you hit for strongest board. A lot of people would just be thinking about, man, I need that 4 Bastion and that Kassadin, maybe play around that Void. Pretty much only units that stay here are Poppy, Soraka, and Kassadin. A lot of these other units will be leaving as fast as he can. So I really like the way Appies is just playing a good board. And now all of a sudden, it looks like he's going to be able to not have to roll for quite some time. And this way he can eco back up to 50 and beyond and starts to slow roll this way. And this is just good recognition of what are some other good units to play around that isn't related to Kassadin. A lot of people want Akshan, and it's even beneficial to potentially give other people who want to play Akshan a hard time while also getting these easy wins. And these wins are also really important too, because remember, he's playing Thresh of Sanctum. So it's not like he just wants to lose all his units. He also wants to kill all the units. He has a lot of firing power behind his Kassadin. Appies is going to look for Jewel Gauntlet. He does have that glove already. It's a 1-cost Rod, so it's actually a big blessing because it's on a cheap unit. Even though there's a bunch of AP players, they have their Jewel Gauntlet slammed. Get that Jewel Gauntlet and Hodge together to get that crit synergy going. Now the question will be whether or not Appies chooses to roll again after this round, because he already won 2, so he wants to keep on winning. But in general, outside of the fact that he could hit maybe a Maokai 2, there's not much improvement to his board because he would have to be taking out 2-star units to play things like a Maokai plus a Taric, even if he does hit that Taric. And then all of a sudden, let's say he's playing 1-star Taric, 2-star Maokai over Akshan 2, Jin 2. No. You do want to keep the Soraka, so you need to keep that Invoker, so you want to take out that Cassiopeia with that Sunfire Cape. No. So there's a lot of awkwardness with him actually rolling here. So that actually makes sense why he doesn't want to commit to rolling deep. He's going to most likely sell his Akshan to make 50 gold and instead just kind of take another loss, which is kind of brutal. Right now, it looks like there's a bunch of haves and have-nots. There's people that have a good board, preserving a lot of HP, and people who are kind of losing a lot and bleeding a lot of HP, and Appies is caught in between. So Appies is rolling a lot of gold here, trying to see if he can find Kassadin 2, but now he's thinking about the value of a Lysandra 2 or even holding extra Sorakas. I think a lot of people think about Soraka as a unit that you only play temporarily, but she's really good in a Bastion setup because she links with Taric and she has really good ability to sustain the fight. So if she's keeping her frontline alive longer, remember, Kassadin is both a assassin, but also an inevitability scaling composition because the more you cast, the more AP you stack. And so having that Soraka in the fight to heal Kassadin if he's really low can be really huge at times. So all throughout stage 3, you saw Appies go for dynamic rolling, which is sometimes he rolls and sometimes he doesn't. A lot of people go for static rolling, meaning that they roll only at specific intervals. If they level to 6, then they roll, and then they don't roll until level 7. If they roll at 7, they don't roll until level 8. Appies evaluates every single situation and round about whether or not rolling would be good. And that's a mark of an experienced and strong player. So right now, we clearly need to power up. So we find Kassadin 2 finally, and we do find 6 Sorakas, which makes me think that we want to commit to it. Finds Ash 2, so he doesn't have a form of Magic Shred, which is really, really important. I emphasize this in every video, but don't play any AP comp without Magic Shred if you can avoid it. But he does have 2 bows, which is really awkward. So I wonder if he's just going to jam an item and reforge it. Oh my goodness. He's going for double Rage Blade on Soraka. That's not exactly what I thought was going to happen, because a lot of times you want things like straight up AP on Soraka, or maybe a Gunblade, maybe give her a JG. So we talk about a secondary carry. It looks like Appy's going to go for Soraka as his secondary source of damage. So we're stopping here. Parting Gifts doesn't look very good in this spot. Scope Weapon's kind of awkward because casting teleports anyways. Not something that's really good with this melee carry in particular. Well-Earned Comforts is still actually about the same as it was before, and he already has that HP with the transfusion with the Bastion, so I'm leaning towards Well-Earned Comforts. But we're gonna reroll first. Oh my goodness, he hits Long Distance Pals. All right, so Long Distance Pals just has to be the take. It is so good. One of the best performing augments, period. And now he finds Taric, so finally he can get to the composition that he was originally going to roll for. In fact, if you look at his level 6, this is the 6 units he probably originally wanted to roll for, but finally, a stage later at 4-2, this is what we hit while getting those 5 Cassidans. The only thing is that with Long Distance Pals, now I do wish that we end up saving things like our Ra, so we can get like Archangel Staff and get a bunch of scaling AP onto that Long Distance Pals. But Appies is still in a pretty interesting spot, so overall looks like he is gonna be able to at least beat people who are still stuck on 1 stars, and that's the advantage of playing an uncontested reroll, is that a lot of other players are gonna be fighting for the same units, while you are likely to 2-star units, and you'll be able to capitalize on the people that are just not hitting. Okay, so he gets an easy win over Kiyun here, as right now he's at 6 Sorakas, 5 Cassidans, 7 Sorakas, 6 Cassidans. I think you could probably roll a little bit more, especially since he has 8 Sorakas now. Finds a Shen, which is the Invoker, can replace probably Poppy if you want to replace a unit. You generally want to go for 6 Bastion, but it's hard to get the 6 Bastion without a +1. Otherwise, you have to hit the Cassante, which is literally impossible at 6, or you pick it up off Carousel. He does end up selling the Lysandra, which makes sense because he doesn't have that Freljord anymore. Doesn't have the extra Invokers, so he'd be stuck at 3 Invokers. So might as well just get this extra Bastion out in front. That shielding can be really, really huge as well for Appies, because if he can get that shield with that Shen, it'll be a really, really good spot. Appies ends up taking another big loss here. And so right now, it's feast or famine. And this is kind of why a lot of people say that Riftwalker is a little bit of a sketchy augment, because if you don't end up getting the Cassin to pop off and kill a bunch of stuff, you'll end up struggling a lot to finish things off, and so many things barely survive, so you end up taking bad losses. So no Cassante off Carousel, but guess what we got? We got a Senna, and Senna is really good in this spot because you're able to get the shielding from her redeemed passive, which will end up stacking onto Cassidon, and it works really well with the Shadow Isles connection to Maokai. We're rolling a lot. I think at this point, we want to hit Cassidon 3. I wonder if Appies wants to roll more, but he's still at 6 Cassidons. Generally, my rule of thumb is for each Cassidon that you're missing, you want to at least have 10 gold before you roll. So in this case, if he's at 6 Cassidons, you want to have 30 gold to roll. If he's at 7 Cassidons, he has 20 gold to roll. If he has 8 Cassidons, obviously you roll to 0 from 10. That's, of course, just a general rule of thumb. It depends on the situation. I'm just giving you general ratios so you have ability to think about your spot critically and evaluate whether or not it's worth sending. In this situation, he stops at 20. I agree. I think he's a little bit too far away from Cassidons. He also might get a Thresh reward, which he does get. Collects the orb and sees that it's a cloak. That could start building towards perhaps an Ionic Spark. He finds 7 Cassidons, which is a little bit dicey. He could actually consider rolling here, but he's at 40 HP. I think that because he's 1 round away from the PV round, I think it's worth holding on to, because the PV round interest is a double dip. The interest that you get this turn plus the interest you get next turn makes it worthwhile for him to hold off. Goes up into the Z3 players. Zed is a little bit tricky because it highly depends on where Cassidon chooses to teleport and how fast you can eliminate some of these other units, so that way you don't get ganged up upon. Oh no, looks like the Soraka just barely dies. That big burst ended up dealing a bunch of damage, and now we are left at just 30 HP. So this spot is pretty difficult. It's not a super high roll spot, and Appies needs to figure out how he can bring himself into this game again. And it's purely based about what he's hitting on 6. In this spot, Appies needs to, well, 1, I think he needs to sacrifice a unit. You can actually play like a Kled or whatever, just let it die, get 1 extra stack, which might make a difference. You never know. So a little bit of a miss here, but not a big deal. And sell to 40. Let's hit that Cassidon 3. Oh, finds a Shiv. Shiv, good for that shred. And talked about how he was missing that for a long time. If he hits Cassidon 3, we might be in business. Okay, so we finally hit Cassidon 3. Level up. And at this point, we level and just play any unit that we can hit. I think I like a second Shen over the Jarvan, but ends up playing a Aphelios instead, which actually makes sense because Aphelios is Targon, so he's getting even more healing, which is a big deal. Oh my god. Now we're starting to one-shot backline because we hit that cast in 3, and it's a huge deal. But the problem is now we have this Warwick that's online, and Warwick is also infinitely scaling composition in the sense that it gets that Rage Blade to scale really aggressively. So we take another unfortunate loss. So now we're down to 16 HP. Oh dear. Appies rolls one time to see if he can hit Shen 2, and if he can hit Shen, he's in a good spot. If he also hits a Cassante, that has to go in, but we're not holding poppies, so this spot is really tight. And it comes down to a lot of things like the positioning as well. His positioning is largely hamstrung by long distance pals because he has to keep these distances in the B1, B7, D1, D7 cubbies. But the side that he chooses on has really big ramifications because the Cassin will TP to the center most likely and then TP to the corner. So he has to make sure that the Cassin is on the same side as the carry that he wants to assassinate. Iun is online with a 2-star Kaisa, but we finally get a big win, which is really huge. If we can get that Cassante and we have to hold those poppies, we'll be in a decent spot, get that 6 Bastion online. And now Appies has recognized that because he's low HP, he has to roll it down every single turn. I think a lot of people would think, oh, Senna with the stacking shields, which is really good with the Bastion, and also things like the attack speed really good in that Shadow Isles. Would I ever take that out for 6 Bastion? Yes, and this is because you can actually go and do things like find out what actually works in the stats. Let's go to Tactic Tools and add in a filter of Cassident and show low play rate compositions. If you look, you'll see Bastion Cassident. You can click that. And you look at traits and you look at the difference between 4 and 6 Bastion. You can see how important it is. 6 Bastion, it averages a 3.41. While 4 Bastion averages a 5.77. That already tells you the difference of jump between 4 and 6 and how important it is for Appies to be able to get to that. If you can get to 8 Bastion, you're most likely going to win the game. 2.1 average placement, by the way. And so if you're thinking about like, do I want 6 Bastion or do I want 3 Targon? Look at the difference between prioritizing 3 Targon versus 6 Bastion. It's a 4.2 versus 3.4. That's 8/10 of a gap, which is a massive difference in average placement. In the ideal world, of course, if you're looking at the core 6 units here with the Bastions and the Cassin, you also look at things like the Senna Cassante with Cassante and Aphelios, and you can see that difference. You're like, oh, do I want that 3 Targon versus that Senna? No, we want that Senna because it shields the entire team and it really works well with our synergies. And so now we're back into the game here, and Appies is clearly going to try to angle for that if he can get there, but because he's so poor, he's probably going to play at level 7 for the rest of the game. He does find a Aphelios pair, though, off of the next Thresh of Strength and Rewards, but he's not going to sell it because he doesn't want to sell pairs at this point. Looking at what other items he can play here, Bastion with Lockets has been nerfed significantly, so not something that you want to play right now in the current patch. But in the future patch, definitely think about making that Bastion Locket if it ends up being a really good item again. Because remember, the reason why it was really powerful is because Targon gives that extra shield, and you're able to get that sustain through the Bastion resistances to combo with that shield. Appies is rolling because at this point he's playing for placements. He wants that Shen 2. It's really huge. If you can get Shen 2 with Bramble and Sunfire and start stacking the Shen, the longer the Shen survives, just gives him more abilities to proc that Rift Walk. He scouts and sees a Zephyr, so now there's a positioning challenge where he has to make sure that this Cassidon doesn't get hit. And this is actually really clever because by positioning the Cassidon in A1 next to the Taric, if his opponent ends up going for that B1 position to try to hit, it's a 50-50 between that Cassidon and that Taric. So that's a small note that gives him a half chance that he's not going to get Zephyred and potentially get everything he wants, which is long distance pals, frontline engagement, and dodging that Zephyr. And Appies gets a really key victory. Every single win here is massive, and he's pretty much going to roll it down here every single turn until he's able to find Shen 2. Unfortunately, he's basically stuck here, and 6 Bastion is completely off the table at this point because he's just rolling to 0 every single turn. He's trying to squeeze in that top 4 as best as he can, which is really important because he can still technically go 8th. Appies then inverts. Now he dodges the Zephyr again, which is really huge. Going up against Zed this time is much better because he has a Bramble Vest. That's another nod to why Bramble Vest would be really strong, because that critical strike chance from the Zed and the Infinity Edge has been greatly reduced by that Shen 1. And so this is a good matchup for him now. And all of a sudden, Appies is on a streak and he's top 5 trying to squeeze in that extra placement here from this spot. I like that Appies is scouting around during the PV, trying to see, one, how people are trying to position default. So keep in mind things like that RC Yasuo, for example, on his opponent is something that he has to scout for and make sure he can position around if he can. Still rolling here to see if he can hit 2-star Shen at 7. Not worth greeting at 8 because, again, he wants to secure that top 4 placement. Item choice here is pretty tricky. You could justify a 3rd Shen item here, which would probably be the Stoneplate Gargoyle. Or you can try to go for an Aphelios item, which I don't know if I entirely agree with. Going for Ionic Spark in case this Soraka dies. Also, it makes sense because he gets the immediate shred. And then as the Soraka attacks, he'll continue to get shred later on after the Shen dies. I actually like that. That makes sense. I don't think Stoneplate Gargoyle is like particularly good because he also has a lot of resistances already, which brings us back to the formula before, which is if you're trying to multiply 2 stats and you have a scale of 1 to 10, you don't want 9 times 1. You want 5 times 5. So if he has a lot of resistances through things like the Bastion, you don't want more resistances because that slides the scales from 5 to 6 to 7 to 8. Instead, he wants more HP or more shred or something else, so that way he can multiply the effectiveness of his stats. Nice crafty positioning to really mix it up. He, by the way, hit Shen 2, which is a really big deal. Finally, we can start thinking about going to level 8. But this is going to be a really tough matchup because this is a Ravenous Hunter Warwick. Oh no, Warwick is stuck on our Kassadin. That is not good. And how many units survive here? That's 6 units plus stage 6 damage. Oh, we barely die, but hey, we preserve enough HP and we landed firmly in 3rd place. And this is definitely a noteworthy performance because if you look at it, Appies was able to squeeze out that 3rd place by making sure to preserve that HP. He had an HP gap, so that ended up being also the difference between 3rd and 4th place. Had he just committed to like, hey, I roll for Kassadin and I'm going to be greeting as much as I can, he might have gotten 4th place or even worse if he didn't preserve enough of that HP. And the comps that are doing really well are the comps that are expected. Ravenous Hunter Warwick is something that's very likely to win the lobby at the moment. And Precedent was able to hit things like 3-star Sona and get that very early so he can preserve that HP himself. But it looks like the Warwick is just going to win this lobby. We can do a little bit of bonus commentary of Into Deep and take a look at what Precedent and Dace are doing. So Precedent is on Vel'Koz 2, which makes it a lot trickier of a way to burst down the Warwick because Vel'Koz is your single target damage, and Sona is your AoE damage. But there's something to watch out for, which is Warwick doesn't have Bloodthirster, meaning that he doesn't have that extra shield. So if you can front load your burst and get a lot of damage going and you're able to same side that Warwick, maybe you can have an opportunity for Precedent to burst it down. So it has to make sure that he has all 3 of his backliners on the right side, which is his Talia, Vel'Koz, and Sona, as well as that Swain. And it looks like he's on the correct side. Sona aims down the correct angle here and hits that Warwick twice. Oh my god, that's huge damage. And now Precedent all of a sudden brings it back. And he might win this lobby, so I might take it all back and say that yes, Warwick was probably destined to win. But now we're down to one single fight here, whether or not Precedent's able to get that dub. Finds that Heimerdinger, maybe get that shred. That shred is also really good to think about if Precedent loses that Swain, but also, he's on low economy, so he picks whatever he can get. Another thing to note is that Precedent did get better rating items now. Before, he was getting things like Gunblade, but now he has actual damage to things like the Death Cap, so big damage. Oh my god, the Warwick's already dead. He switched the items also to place higher single target DPS with Azir. This is a really good nod from Precedent to recognize that he's weaker on the single target DPS. And Azir 2 is better than Talia 2. He doesn't have Vel'Koz 3. He needs to find a way to kill that Warwick ASAP. So really good job by Precedent to even adapt to how to beat that Warwick in the late stages of the game. Well done. So there you go. Appies ends with the top 3 and showcases why he is one of the best off-meta players in North America. And all throughout the Freljord Cup, he ended in 10th place with an insane average of 3.7, one of the best in all of the tournament. Congratulations to Appy for a fantastic tournament, and I hope you guys enjoyed his gameplay. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.